battlefield fell silent as Sergeant Emma Hayes raised the night vision scope to her eye. No movement, no enemy signatures, just ghostly stillness across the valley floor. The team had been tracking reports of an invisible killer for weeks, a phantom marksman whose shots materialized without warning, leaving precision death in their wake. At first, Command dismissed the stories as battle fatigue or superstition. The response was clinical. Investigate, verify, neutralize. Emma said nothing when assigned to the hunter team. She didn't volunteer information. And then everything changed. Someone in intelligence recognized a pattern in the kill shots. Someone else remembered the combat legend Emma had been part of before her official discharge. What began as routine reconnaissance turned into something else entirely. A summoning, not a mission. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains of northern Afghanistan stretched endlessly under the pale moonlight, jagged peaks cutting into a star-filled sky. Emma sat motionless on the ridge overlooking the valley, her camouflaged form blending perfectly with the rocky terrain. The air at this elevation carried the bite of approaching winter, thin, sharp, and unforgiving as the landscape itself. Her breath condensed in small clouds that dissipated quickly in the darkness. Every subtle shift in the valley below registered in her awareness. She didn't flinch when small rocks skittered down the slope behind her, or when the radio at her hip crackled with encrypted transmissions. She had spent 3 years honing her skills in environments where the slightest movement meant death. She understood what it meant to become invisible even to those hunting ghosts. The worn patch on her shoulder, barely visible in the moonlight, hadn't been standard issue for years. The emblem of the disbanded Phantom Scout program, a spectral figure with a rifle silhouette against a dark background. The program's existence wasn't publicly acknowledged, but those who knew of it spoke in hushed tones. Her record wasn't discussed in briefings. Her methods weren't taught in training. But the results spoke for themselves. She wasn't supposed to be in this combat zone. That much became clear when Captain Reynolds briefed the team back at Forward Operating Base. His voice was clipped, professional, skeptical. "We're tracking an unknown shooter. Multiple casualties across 3 provinces. No witness reports. No ballistic evidence recovered. Command thinks it's a local with exceptional skill and knowledge of the terrain." Emma adjusted her position slightly, rocks digging into her elbows as she maintained her observation of the valley. She'd deployed to this same ridge 5 years earlier under different circumstances. The mountains hadn't changed. The mission had evolved. Her attention remained absolute. The watch wasn't for revenge. It was for verification. She keyed her communications device. Voice even, nearly a whisper. Phantom 1 to Hunter Base. No movement in Sector 3. Continuing observation. There was a pause. The second voice was colder. Hunter Base to Phantom 1. Maintain position. Intelligence indicates high probability of target presence in your sector by dawn. Do not engage without backup. Repeat. Do not engage. The squad leader, Lieutenant Mason, monitored from 2 ridges away, his voice tight with the edge of someone who didn't fully understand why a former Special Operations scout had been attached to his regular infantry team. "She's only here as a consultant. Ghost stories don't kill soldiers. Tangible enemies with actual rifles do." Emma kept her position unchanged. The night vision revealed nothing unusual, but her senses extended beyond technology. The air pressure, wind direction, subtle shifts in animal sounds from the sparse vegetation below. These told her more than electronic equipment ever could. She didn't speak unnecessarily. There was no point. The tactical radio crackled again. "This mission is a waste of resources," Lieutenant Mason continued. "Command's chasing shadows because they can't admit a skilled local fighter has outmaneuvered our conventional tactics." Emma didn't respond. Her focus remained on the valley below, particularly on a narrow pass where the terrain created a natural choke point. She'd noted it earlier during the terrain analysis, the perfect position for an ambush or for a ghost to materialize. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mountains had taught her patience. When she first joined Phantom Scout, her instructor, an aging Green Beret with eyes that had seen too much, told her the secret wasn't technology or physical endurance. You must learn to think like the land. The mountains breathe. They speak. They reveal everything if you know how to listen. For 3 years, she had done nothing but listen, to the wind passing through narrow defiles, to rock vibrations that carried footsteps from impossible distances, to the subtle changes in bird calls that announced human presence long before visual confirmation. She checked her rifle once more. The custom M24 sniper weapon system rested against her shoulder like an extension of her body, not a tool but a continuation of her will. The scope had been meticulously calibrated for this elevation and temperature. The ammunition hand-loaded for consistency, the barrel wrapped in thermal dampening material to prevent heat signatures. Everything designed for one purpose: to make death invisible. Phantom 1. Report status, the radio demanded. Position secure. No target indicators, she replied, her voice barely audible even to herself. On the other ridge, Lieutenant Mason conferred with his team sergeant. What's the real story with Hayes? Her file is more redacted than readable. The sergeant, a veteran of 4 combat tours, kept his voice low. Phantom Scout was a black program, specialized infiltration and elimination. They operated alone behind enemy lines for months at a time. The program was officially disbanded after an operation in these same mountains 3 years ago. Something went wrong, really wrong. And Hayes? Only survivor. They say she stayed in these mountains for 6 months after the mission went sideways. No contact, no support, no extraction plan. When she finally walked into a forward operating base, she carried 8 confirmed kill tokens from high-value targets that intelligence hadn't even been able to locate. That sounds like propaganda, Mason said skeptically. Maybe. But I've seen what happens when conventional tactics meet unconventional enemies. If there's a ghost shooter out there, I'd put my money on Hayes to find it. The night deepened around Emma, the temperature dropping further as the hours passed. She remained motionless, conserving energy, regulating her breathing to minimize vapor trails. The valley below held its secrets, but she could feel the presence growing closer, not through technology, but through the same instinct that had kept her alive when the rest of her team perished. The first tangible sign came just before midnight, a subtle shift in the air current, not natural wind but displacement from movement somewhere below. Her muscles tensed infinitesimally, eyes scanning methodically through the scope. There, a shadow moving differently than the others, flowing against the natural patterns of darkness. Most observers would have missed it, but Emma had learned to see what wasn't there rather than what was. She didn't radio immediately. Confirmation first, then communication. The figure moved with exceptional discipline, using terrain features to break up its outline. No equipment noise, no light signature, minimal heat signature. Professional, methodical, almost familiar. Emma's heartbeat remained steady as she tracked the shadow through her scope. The movement patterns triggered recognition deep in her training. The way the figure melted between positions, used micro-terrain for concealment, calculated exposure angles against potential observation points. This wasn't a local fighter, regardless of how skilled. This was specialized training. This was Phantom Scout methodology. Her finger hovered near the transmit button, but instinct held her back. Something wasn't right. The figure below moved too confidently, too aware of observation positions that hadn't been compromised. It moved as if it knew the hunter team's deployment pattern, as if it could see them. On the distant ridge, Lieutenant Mason shifted position, a small adjustment to relieve pressure on his legs after hours of observation. The movement was minimal, professional, almost undetectable. Almost. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the night's silence, its echo bouncing between mountain walls like thunder. Mason's position erupted in frantic radio calls. Contact! Sniper fire! The LT is hit! Emma didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't expose her position. Her mind calculated instantly. Shot origin, target selection, timing. The ghost hadn't fired randomly. It had waited until the precise moment when movement created vulnerability, then executed with surgical precision. Phantom 1, we need covering fire! Can you identify the shooter's position? Emma keyed her mic, voice still calm, despite the chaos erupting around her. Negative. Shot origin uncertain. Maintain cover. Do not attempt to evacuate the lieutenant yet. He's bleeding out. We need immediate. Another shot cracked across the valley. Another cry of pain. The shooter was methodically eliminating the team's leadership structure. Not random violence. Calculated degradation of command and control. Phantom scout tactics. Emma's mind raced through implications. The ghost wasn't just using similar methodology, it was using identical techniques. Techniques that only 8 people in the world had been trained to execute, 7 of whom were dead. She was the 8th, or so she had believed. The radio erupted with panicked transmissions as the hunter team attempted to coordinate evacuation while under precision fire from an unseen enemy. Emma ignored the chaos, her focus narrowing to the valley floor. The ghost had revealed itself through action. Now the patterns would tell her everything she needed to know. 2 more shots in rapid succession. 2 more cries of pain. The hunter team was being systematically disabled without being eliminated. Wounded soldiers created more tactical problems than dead ones. Their training would compel them to evacuate casualties rather than abandon them, forcing movement, creating exposure, generating more targets. It was a masterful manipulation of military doctrine. It was exactly what she would have done. Emma made her decision. She keyed the radio once more. Hunter base, this is Phantom 1. I'm moving to intercept the target. Recommend immediate extraction for wounded personnel. Negative Phantom 1. Maintain position and provide. She removed the radio earpiece, silencing the commands. Standard operating procedure wouldn't work against this enemy. Conventional tactics would fail. The only way to hunt a ghost was to become one. Emma secured her rifle and began moving, not away from the danger, but directly toward it. She descended the ridge in complete silence, using natural terrain features to mask her movement. No rush, no panic, just the methodical flow of someone who had learned to move as part of a landscape rather than across it. The shooting had stopped. The ghost had withdrawn after creating maximum tactical disruption. Now it would relocate, find new firing positions, continue the psychological destruction of the unit. Standard Phantom Scout procedure. Never engage from the same position twice, never establish patterns, become the embodiment of death without form. Emma moved through the darkness like water, finding paths between stones. Her senses extended beyond normal human capacity, not supernatural, but hyper-developed through thousands of hours in environments where the slightest error meant death. She could feel the ghost's path through subtle disturbances in the environment, bent grass stems, displaced pebbles, air currents carrying the faintest scent of weapon oil. The valley stretched before her, a maze of shadows and stone. Somewhere within it, a killer moved with the same training, the same methodology, possibly even the same objective as herself. The difference was, Emma knew she hunted a phantom. The phantom didn't yet know it was being hunted by one of its own. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the deadly game unfolding below. The mountains watched in silence as 2 ghosts began circling each other in a dance of death that had begun years before, when a classified program created warriors designed to become one with darkness itself. Emma Hayes had been declared dead once before, after the mission that destroyed her team. She had lived as a ghost in these same mountains for months afterward, hunting high-value targets without support or recognition. Now she was hunting again, but this time, her target was something she had believed impossible, another survivor of Phantom Scout, or perhaps something worse, the enemy who had destroyed them, who had learned their methods by killing them one by one. Either way, by dawn, 1 ghost would remain. 1 ghost would vanish forever. The mountains would bear witness, as they always had, to the deadly truth that some shadows were more than just the absence of light. The night deepened around her as Emma moved through the valley. The faint sounds of a medical evacuation helicopter echoed in the distance, the hunter team extracting their wounded. She felt no concern for them now. They were simply pieces moved off the board, leaving 2 players in a game where visibility meant death. The ghost would be watching the evacuation, analyzing patterns, planning its next move. Emma circled wide, using the distraction to close distance. Not pursuing directly, that would be suicide against a Phantom Scout. Instead, she moved to where she would be if she were the ghost. Position. Counterposition, prediction based on shared methodology. The mountains held their secrets close, but to those who knew how to listen, they revealed everything. Emma had lived among these peaks long enough to hear their whispers. The ghost had made its first move. Now it was her turn in a lethal game of chess where neither player could see the other. But both understood exactly what was at stake. By first light, one hunter would become prey. One ghost would become corporeal. One shadow would step into the light, forever changed by the darkness it had embraced. Emma Hayes moved silent as death itself, determined that when dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, she would be the last ghost standing. The false dawn cast an eerie blue light across the valley floor as Emma moved through the shadows with practiced precision. She had been tracking the ghost for 3 hours, following a trail imperceptible to untrained eyes, the faintest compression in soil, misaligned pebbles, microscopic threads caught on thorny vegetation. The evacuation helicopter had departed long ago, carrying the wounded hunter team back to base, leaving 2 phantoms circling each other in deadly silence. Emma paused beneath an outcropping of rock, becoming completely still. Her breathing slowed to a shallow rhythm that barely disturbed the air around her. She had learned this stillness during her Phantom Scout training, not merely the absence of movement, but a deeper integration with the environment that made her nearly undetectable. The mountains had taught her that true invisibility came not from hiding, but from becoming part of what surrounded you. The ghostly blue light gradually warmed to the pink gold of true dawn. Emma remained motionless, listening to the mountains awakening around her. A slight change in the morning birdsong to her left, subtle, almost imperceptible, caused her muscles to tense fractionally. Something had disturbed the natural patterns. Something that moved as she did, with the same training, the same lethal purpose. She detected it before she saw it. The slightest pressure change in the air, a presence moving through the landscape with supernatural awareness. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness beneath a distant ridge. The figure moved with calculated efficiency, using every available feature for concealment while maintaining clean sightlines to potential target areas. Emma watched through her scope, recognizing the movement pattern immediately. It wasn't just similar to Phantom Scout methodology, it was identical. The revelation sent ice through her veins. Not fear. Emma had moved beyond conventional fear years ago, but the cold certainty of confirmation. Only 8 operators had ever completed Phantom Scout training. 7 had died during the mission that went catastrophically wrong 3 years ago. She was supposed to be the sole survivor, yet the evidence before her eyes contradicted everything she believed about that fateful night. The figure paused, seemingly sensing observation despite Emma's perfect concealment. This was no ordinary adversary. This was someone with the same hyper-developed awareness, the same integration with the environment, the same deadly patience. The ghost rotated slowly, surveying the terrain with methodical precision, then melted back into the shadows with fluid grace. Emma made her decision. Direct pursuit would be suicide against an opponent of equal skill. Instead, she would force engagement on her terms. She began moving parallel to the ghost's path, not following but anticipating, using her intimate knowledge of both the terrain and Phantom Scout protocols to predict the next position. The mountains had been her home and teacher for years. Every ridge, every depression, every seasonal watercourse was mapped in her memory more precisely than any satellite imagery could capture. The sun crept higher, casting long shadows across the valley that provided both concealment and vulnerability. Emma used these transitional light patterns to her advantage, moving when shadow coverage was optimal, freezing into absolute stillness when exposure risk increased. She was no longer just hunting. She was setting a trap for someone who knew all the same tricks. An hour later, she reached a narrow ravine cutting through the eastern ridge. The position offered multiple tactical advantages: limited approach vectors, excellent sightlines, natural sound amplification that would reveal movement from hundreds of meters away. It was exactly where she would position herself if roles were reversed, which meant the ghost would either avoid it completely or attempt to clear it with extreme caution. Emma melted into a crevice where 2 massive boulders met, creating a shadow so deep it remained untouched by the strengthening morning light. Her rifle rested against her shoulder, perfectly balanced and aligned for maximum coverage of the most likely approach path. She didn't move, didn't shift position to relieve pressure points, didn't allow her mind to wander. She became one with the stone, her breathing synchronized with the gentle mountain breeze that whispered through the ravine. The wait extended from minutes to hours. Lesser warriors would have grown impatient, would have doubted their assessment, would have repositioned or abandoned the strategy entirely. Emma remained perfectly still, conserving energy with the efficiency of a predator that understood the value of patience. The mountains had taught her that time flowed differently for those who learned to listen rather than impose their will. Just past noon, the first sign came, not a visual confirmation, but a subtle change in the air current flowing through the ravine. Someone was moving upwind, disturbing the natural flow patterns. Emma's muscles tensed imperceptibly, her focus narrowing to absolute clarity. The ghost was approaching, using the same ravine she had anticipated, moving with the same methodical caution she would have employed. She glimpsed movement. Just a flicker of shadow against shadow, 300 meters down the ravine. Most observers would have dismissed it as imagination or a trick of light. Emma recognized it as deliberate movement by someone trained to be invisible. The ghost was conducting a reconnaissance sweep before committing to the passage. Emma didn't shift position, didn't adjust her aim, didn't even blink. The slightest movement now would alert her target to the ambush. Instead, she focused on controlling her physiological responses, maintaining shallow breathing, slowing her heart rate, minimizing body heat that might create a thermal signature. She became colder than the stone surrounding her, more still than the mountain itself. Minutes stretched into eternity as the ghost conducted its careful evaluation of the ravine. Then, apparently satisfied, the figure began moving forward with the fluid grace that characterized Phantom Scout operators. The movement was so perfectly integrated with the environment that it seemed more like a shadow shifting with the sun's passage than a human traversing difficult terrain. Through her scope, Emma caught the first clear glimpse of her adversary, a figure in advanced camouflage that adapted to surrounding colors and textures. Face obscured by a mask designed to break up human features. Equipment minimized and secured to prevent noise or reflection. The loadout was nearly identical to her own, reinforcing her suspicion that this was no ordinary enemy. She tracked the ghost through her scope, waiting for the perfect moment when the figure would be fully committed to the ravine passage with no immediate cover. Patience had always been her greatest weapon, more deadly than any bullet. The ghost moved methodically closer, unaware that it approached its own end. At 200 meters, Emma made her final shooting calculations. Distance, wind, temperature, humidity, factors that influenced the bullet's path and required compensation. Her finger took the first pressure on the trigger, steadying for the shot that would end this deadly game. The ghost stopped suddenly, head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond normal human perception. Then, to Emma's shock, the figure spoke aloud, the first sound either had made in this silent hunt. "I know you're there, Emma. You always did prefer high ground with multiple escape routes." The voice echoed off the ravine walls, female, calm, chillingly familiar. Emma maintained her position, fingers still on the trigger, mind racing to process this impossible development. The voice belonged to someone she had watched die 3 years ago, someone whose body she had been forced to leave behind during her desperate escape from the mission that destroyed Phantom Scout. "Captain Davis?" she whispered, the name barely audible even to herself. "The same," the figure replied, somehow detecting Emma's whisper despite the distance. "Though, like you, I've left rank and name behind. We're both ghosts now, aren't we?" Emma maintained her shooting position, mind calculating possibilities. This could be an elaborate psychological operation, someone using her dead commander's voice to create hesitation. Or perhaps the unthinkable had happened. Captain Alexis Davis had somehow survived the ambush that killed the rest of their team. "You died in the Korangal," Emma said, voice stronger now. "I saw you take multiple hits." The figure below made no threatening movements, remaining in the open with apparent confidence. "I was wounded, not killed. After you escaped, they took me. Studied our methodologies, our equipment, our training. They've spent 3 years trying to create their own Phantom program." "Who took you?" Emma demanded, scope still trained on the figure's center mass. "The same shadow contractors who betrayed our mission. The same people who decided Phantom Scout knew too much about their illegal operations in country." The same people who are watching this conversation right now, testing both of us. Emma's mind raced through implications. Captain Davis had been her mentor, the architect of many Phantom Scout tactics, the leader who had pushed her beyond normal human limitations during training. If she had survived and been captured, the consequences were catastrophic. Everything Phantom Scout knew, the enemy now knew as well. "Why should I believe you?" Emma asked, finger still steady on the trigger. The figure below slowly, deliberately, reached up and removed her mask, revealing a face Emma had believed long dead. The features were thinner, harder, marked by faint scars that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably belonged to Captain Alexis Davis. "Because you're still alive," Davis replied simply. "If I wanted you dead, you would have been ambushed at the Ridge observation point before you ever saw me. I wasn't hunting the team sent to find me. I was eliminating the surveillance elements watching them. And you." Emma maintained her shooting position, years of training overriding the emotional shock of seeing her commander alive. "The wounded soldiers will recover. Superficial wounds, deliberately placed. I needed to create chaos to eliminate the actual threats without revealing my true targets." Davis gestured to the ridges surrounding them. "There were 4 shadow contractors embedded with observation equipment around your hunter team. They're no longer observing anything." The tactical calculation shifted in Emma's mind. If Davis was telling the truth, this wasn't a simple Phantom versus Phantom scenario. It was something far more complex. A counterintelligence operation with lethal stakes. "You've been operating independently for 3 years?" Emma asked, still not lowering her weapon. Davis nodded. "After I escaped, I realized the extent of the corruption. Phantom Scout wasn't disbanded because of mission failure. It was targeted for elimination, because we discovered evidence of illegal operations by private military contractors, working with elements inside our own command structure. They couldn't risk what we knew becoming public." Emma processed this against her own experiences after the failed mission. Her 6-month survival period in the mountains hadn't been random. She had been systematically eliminating high-value targets connected to the same contractor network, though she hadn't understood the full picture at the time. "Why reveal yourself now?" Emma asked. "Because you're the only other survivor who can help me complete the mission," Davis replied. "The same contractors who betrayed Phantom Scout have expanded their operation. They're running weapons, drugs, and intelligence to multiple hostile actors. They've compromised command structures across 3 military branches. And they've created their own version of our program, Dark Phantom, with none of the ethical constraints we operated under." Emma's tactical mind assessed options rapidly. If Davis was lying, lowering her weapon meant death. If Davis was telling the truth, maintaining her shooting position wasted valuable time against a greater threat. The decision required something beyond training or protocol. It required the intuition that had kept her alive when logic said she should have died with her team. She studied Davis through the scope, looking beyond tactical positioning to the subtler signs that training couldn't fully disguise. Micro-expressions, body language, the specific pattern of scars consistent with the wounds Emma had witnessed years ago. Everything aligned with her commander's identity, with one exception. The eyes held a hardness that hadn't existed before, the look of someone who had endured unimaginable experiences and emerged fundamentally changed. Emma lowered her rifle fractionally, not surrendering her tactical advantage, but signaling provisional trust. "You've been eliminating their embedded observers to clear communication channels." Davis nodded. "They have surveillance assets throughout this region. Electronic countermeasures aren't enough. They've developed systems that can detect and decode even our most secured communications. The only way to speak freely was to eliminate all potential observation points." "And the hunter team? Why target them?" "Misdirection. They were never the primary targets, but their presence provided cover for my real objectives. The wounds I inflicted were calculated to force evacuation without causing permanent damage." Davis gestured to the surrounding mountains. "We're clear now, but not for long. They'll send more assets once they realize their surveillance network has gone dark." Emma fully lowered her rifle, trusting her instincts that had never betrayed her in the field. "What's your plan?" Davis moved forward with the fluid grace that characterized Phantom Scout operators, covering ground with impossible speed despite the rugged terrain. Within minutes, she had reached Emma's position, moving into the shadow of the same boulder formation. Their main operations center is 30 kilometers east, Davis explained, producing a small electronic device with detailed tactical imagery. It's where they've been developing the Dark Phantom program, training operators with our methodologies but without the psychological safeguards or ethical constraints. They're creating pure assassination units with no accountability to military command structures. Emma studied the imagery, recognizing the tactical implications immediately. A private Phantom program would destabilize the entire region. No high-value target would be safe, no peace negotiation secure. Exactly. And they're 3 weeks from full operational deployment. The team you were part of wasn't sent to find a ghost marksman. They were sent to confirm my elimination before final deployment of the Dark Phantom units. Your presence was specifically requested because they wanted absolute verification that no original Phantom Scout operators remained alive to expose their operation. The strategic picture clarified in Emma's mind. She wasn't a consultant on this mission. She was bait, meant to draw out any surviving Phantom Scout operators before the contractors launched their privatized assassination program. How do we stop them? Emma asked, tactical mind already formulating approaches. Davis smiled slightly, the first expression of anything beyond operational focus. With what we do best, they've spent 3 years studying how Phantom Scout operates, developing countermeasures for every technique and tactic in our playbook. Her eyes held a cold determination that sent a chill down Emma's spine. But they've never seen what two phantoms can accomplish working together. There's no countermeasure for what they've never observed. The sun had reached its zenith, casting minimal shadows across the harsh landscape. Most operators would consider this the worst possible time for movement or infiltration. For Phantom Scout, it presented unique advantages. The absence of shadow patterns created a different kind of concealment opportunity for those trained to use it. "We move now," Davis said, securing her equipment with practiced efficiency. Their observation gaps are largest during shift changes at the operations center. We have a 6-hour window to cover 30 kilometers and infiltrate their facility. Emma checked her own gear, mind shifting fully into operational mode. The shock of finding her commander alive was compartmentalized, stored for later processing when the mission was complete. Now there was only the objective, the approach, the execution. The mountains watched in silence as two ghosts prepared to become the hunters they were born to be. Not separate phantoms circling in deadly competition, but a unified force with capabilities beyond anything their creators had envisioned. They moved out together, two shadows merging into the harsh daylight, becoming invisible not through concealment, but through perfect integration with the environment. The wind whispered through ancient valleys as the mountains bore witness to the deadly reunion of the last Phantom Scout operators, two ghosts about to teach their betrayers the true meaning of fear. The harsh midday sun beat down on the barren landscape as Emma and Davis moved across terrain that would have stopped most elite operators. 30 kilometers through hostile territory would be considered a multi-day operation by conventional forces. The two Phantom Scout operators intended to cover it in 6 hours. They maintained a punishing pace that combined rapid movement with perfect environmental integration, using micro-terrain features for momentary concealment while never stopping completely. The Dark Phantom facility is built into the eastern face of Chirac Mountain, Davis explained during a brief hydration pause, her voice barely audible above the wind. 3 levels, hardened against conventional attack, with surveillance systems adapted from our own Phantom Scout protocols. They believe it's impenetrable. Emma studied the digital imagery Davis had provided, noting approach vectors and defensive positions. Every fortress has vulnerabilities. What's their weakest point? Their power generation system. The facility requires significant electricity for the training simulations and surveillance network. They've installed a geothermal tap that draws energy from underground thermal vents. The intake system creates a blind spot in their security grid. Small, but exploitable if you know exactly where to look. Emma nodded, understanding immediately. The most sophisticated security systems often contained vulnerabilities, precisely where they interfaced with essential infrastructure, seams, where different systems met and created microgaps in coverage. Their confidence is their greatest weakness, Davis continued. They believe no one knows the facility exists, and that no operator could approach undetected even if they did know. Their security protocols are designed to detect conventional special forces, not their own creation. How many Dark Phantom operators are active? Emma asked, calculating tactical implications. 12 in final phase training, each comparable to a fully qualified Phantom Scout operator, but without the psychological safeguards or ethical constraints. They're creating pure killers with all our skills but none of our humanity. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of diesel and human activity from the east. Indicators imperceptible to normal operators but clear signals to those trained to detect what others missed. They were approaching the outer security perimeter. Their surveillance extends 16 kilometers from the facility, Davis warned. Multiple layers, both technological and human. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, sound detection, automated drone patrols, sniper positions, and roving scout teams. Emma absorbed this information without breaking stride. Just like the challenges we faced in final qualification. Davis smiled grimly. Nearly identical. They've replicated our training scenarios to prepare their own operators. The difference is, we've already passed those tests. They pushed deeper into the security zone, moving not in straight lines but in carefully calculated patterns that exploited blind spots in coverage. Their progression resembled natural movement rather than human transit, flowing like water around obstacles, integrating with terrain features, becoming indistinguishable from the environment itself. 4 hours into their approach, they encountered the first tangible sign of the facility's security measures. A camouflaged observation post positioned on a ridge overlooking a natural choke point. 2 operators with advanced optics and communications equipment maintained watch, scanning patterns designed to detect even the most sophisticated infiltration attempts. Emma and Davis separated without verbal communication, each understanding instinctively how the other would approach the threat. They circled wide, using elevation changes to remain below the observer's line of sight, then converged from opposite directions with synchronized timing that would have seemed choreographed to outside observers. The guards never saw what hit them. No shots fired, no alarms triggered, just the whisper of movement and then darkness, as phantom hands delivered precisely calculated strikes to pressure points. Both sentries were unconscious before they realized they were under attack, their communications equipment disabled with surgical precision. "We have 14 minutes before they're required to check in," Davis whispered, securing the incapacitated guards with restraints that would hold for hours. "Their absence will trigger an escalating response pattern. First radio checks, then nearby team verification, then facility lockdown if both fail." "Then we use their response against them," Emma replied, already formulating the approach. "Create misdirection on the western perimeter to draw security assets away from our actual ingress point." Davis nodded approval. Just like Kabul. They moved with renewed purpose, covering ground with impossible speed, while maintaining complete sensory awareness of their surroundings. Emma felt a familiar rhythm developing, the perfect synchronization of 2 operators who understood each other's capabilities at a level beyond conscious thought. This was what Phantom Scout had been created to achieve, human weapons systems operating with machine precision but human adaptability. At the 13-kilometer mark, they paused at the edge of a steep ravine. Below, a narrow trail showed signs of regular patrol activity, scuff marks on stones, compressed soil, the faint residue of boot material transferred to rocky surfaces. Davis produced a small device from her equipment and made minute adjustments to its settings. "Remote transmitter keyed to their communication frequency," she explained. "When activated, it will replicate an emergency distress call from a Western Sector patrol, complete with simulated weapon fire audio. That should pull response teams away from our approach vector for approximately 22 minutes. Emma checked her equipment one final time, ensuring everything was secured against noise or detection. "What's our contingency if we're compromised before reaching the facility?" Davis's expression hardened. "There is no contingency. If we're detected, the facility goes into complete lockdown and the Dark Phantom operators deploy immediately. This is our only window." The implications hung between them, mission, success, or death, with nothing in between. It was the purest distillation of what Phantom Scout had always been. Operators who accepted that their lives were secondary to mission objectives, who would complete their assignment regardless of personal cost. They descended into the ravine with controlled movements, using natural hand and footholds to avoid disturbing the loose scree that would betray their presence. At the bottom, Davis activated the distraction device, setting it to trigger 15 minutes later, precisely when they would be approaching the most exposed segment of their route. 8 kilometers to the facility perimeter, Davis murmured. The heaviest concentration of surveillance technologies is in the final 3 kilometers. After that, we reach the geothermal intake blind spot. Emma nodded, focusing her mind on the approaching challenge. The landscape around them was deceptively peaceful, wind brushing across rock faces, occasional birds circling on thermal currents, distant peaks catching the afternoon sun. Yet beneath this tranquility lay an invisible web of detection systems designed specifically to catch phantoms. They moved forward in perfect coordination, adjusting their pace and pattern to exploit natural coverage. As they crossed the 10-kilometer mark, the terrain began changing subtly. More evidence of human activity and precisely measured soil compaction patterns, and artificially maintained vegetation designed to conceal sensors. Davis suddenly froze, raising her hand in the silent signal for immediate halt. Emma stopped instantly, becoming one with her surroundings as her senses extended to identify the threat. Then she felt it. The faint vibration through the ground, the subtle shift in air pressure that indicated approaching aerial surveillance. "Drone patrol," Davis mouthed silently, gesturing upward and to the east. They melted into the landscape, using natural shadow patterns and terrain coloration to break up their outlines. Seconds later, a small reconnaissance drone appeared over the ridge, its flight pattern suggesting automated patrol rather than directed search. The device hovered briefly, multispectral sensors scanning the area with mechanical precision, then continued on its programmed route. When it passed beyond detection range, they resumed movement with heightened vigilance. The security layers were intensifying as they approached the facility, each zone more densely monitored than the last, each requiring more sophisticated evasion techniques. At the 6-kilometer mark, their distraction activated. Even at this distance, they could hear the faint crackle of simulated weapons fire and the sudden surge of communication traffic as response teams deployed to the western perimeter. The security web around them thinned perceptibly as assets were redirected to the false threat. "Now we move," Davis whispered. Full speed to the 5-kilometer mark, then absolute stealth the rest of the way. They accelerated to a pace that would have been impossible for conventional operators, covering ground with the fluid efficiency of predators in their natural environment. The sun had begun its westward descent, creating longer shadows that provided additional concealment options. At precisely 5 kilometers from the facility, they transitioned to their final approach methodology, the technique known in Phantom Scout as ghost walking. Every movement slowed to a deliberate pace, each step calculated to disturb nothing, each breath controlled to minimize thermal signature. Progress measured in meters rather than kilometers, patience becoming their primary weapon. The outer facility perimeter materialized as they crested a small rise, not an obvious fence or wall, but a subtly altered landscape with integrated security features. Disguised cameras mounted in rock formations, pressure sensors embedded in soil, thermal detection arrays concealed in natural features. To the untrained eye, it appeared as untouched wilderness. To Phantom Scout operators, it was a sophisticated defensive grid. Davis indicated a narrow drainage channel that cut through the perimeter, the water runoff path from the facility's cooling systems, disguised to appear as a natural seasonal waterway. This was their entry point, the seam in the defensive armor, where infrastructure requirements created vulnerability. They approached with excruciating patience, testing each step before committing weight, validating each movement before proceeding. The channel appeared unguarded, but both new appearances meant nothing in their world. The most dangerous traps were those you never saw until triggered. Emma detected it first, the faint electromagnetic field emanating from concealed sensors along the channel walls. She signaled to Davis, who produced a small device from her equipment and made microscopic adjustments to its settings. When activated, the device emitted a matching field that created a momentary blind spot in the sensor array, a technology developed by Phantom Scout, but apparently unknown to the facility's designers. They slipped through the gap with synchronized precision, entering the drainage channel that would lead them directly into the heart of the facility. The concrete tunnel sloped gently downward, carrying minimal water flow from recent operations. The walls bore subtle marking systems, maintenance codes that would appear meaningless to outsiders but provided Davis with navigational information. 200 meters to the intake junction, she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the air. From there, we can access the maintenance ducts that connect to the primary facility. They moved through the channel like shadows, leaving no trace of their passage. The distant hum of machinery grew steadily louder, the geothermal power system that sustained the entire operation. As they approached the junction, the tunnel widened into a small maintenance access room filled with monitoring equipment and control panels. Davis moved directly to a secured access panel, examining its locking mechanism with professional appreciation. Advanced biometric security, retinal scan, fingerprint analysis, and voice recognition. Emma studied the system, identifying its vulnerabilities. Standard countermeasures? Davis nodded, producing a specialized tool from her equipment. They're using our own security protocols, which means they're vulnerable to our override systems. The device attached to the access panel with magnetic precision, its interface connecting to the security system's diagnostic port. A series of coded sequences bypassed the authentication requirements, exploiting maintenance backdoors that existed in all such systems but were known only to those who designed them. The panel disengaged with a barely audible click. Beyond lay a narrow maintenance tunnel that provided access to the facility's infrastructure systems. Power conduits, ventilation ducts, data cabling, all the essential services that kept the operation functioning. From here we have 3 access options, Davis explained, producing detailed schematics from memory. Ventilation system leads to the upper training levels, but is equipped with motion and thermal sensors. Maintenance shaft provides direct access to the command center but is regularly patrolled. Electrical conduit tunnel connects to the data center with minimal security but requires navigation through extremely confined spaces. Emma assessed each option against their tactical objectives. The data center gives us what we need, access to their entire operation, including training protocols and deployment plans for the Dark Phantom operators. Davis nodded agreement. Electrical conduit it is. We'll need to disconnect our communications equipment. The power conduits create interference fields that will damage any active electronics. They secured their sensitive equipment and entered the narrow tunnel, a claustrophobic space barely wide enough for their shoulders. The path twisted through the heart of the facility, following power distribution networks that fed the massive computing systems. The air grew warmer as they progressed, heat generated by servers and processing units creating a temperature gradient that increased with every meter. After 20 minutes of carefully navigating the constricted passage, they reached a ventilation grate that overlooked the data center, a cavernous room filled with server racks, cooling systems, and workstations. 3 technicians monitored operations, their attention focused on displays showing real-time data analysis. Davis signaled their approach. Emma would create a distraction while Davis neutralized the technicians. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Emma removed a small device from her equipment and calculated the optimal placement. When activated, it would trigger an apparent cooling system malfunction in the farthest server bank. Nothing damaging, but sufficient to draw attention away from their entry point. The distraction worked perfectly. As warning indicators activated across the monitoring stations, all 3 technicians moved to address the apparent malfunction. Davis dropped silently through the ventilation access, moving across the room with predatory efficiency. The technicians never saw her coming. 3 precise strikes to pressure points, and all 3 unconscious without raising alarm. Emma followed, securing the room's entry points while Davis moved directly to the central command terminal. The security protocols were sophisticated but fell quickly to specialized intrusion tools designed specifically for such systems. Within minutes, Davis had accessed the facility's operational core, all the data that defined the Dark Phantom program. 12 operators in final training phase, she confirmed, scrolling through personnel files. Deployment scheduled for next week. Target packages already assigned. Political leaders, military commanders, intelligence assets across 3 countries. Emma reviewed the tactical implications. A coordinated assassination campaign designed to destabilize the entire region. The power vacuum would create perfect conditions for whoever is financing this operation. Davis continued accessing files, copying critical data to a secure device, while simultaneously planting specialized code within the system. The financial backers include elements we suspected: private military contractors, certain government officials, weapons manufacturers who profit from regional instability. "What's your plan?" Emma asked, maintaining security awareness while Davis worked. Two-phase approach. First, extract all operational data and transmit to trusted intelligence assets outside the contractor network. Second, implement system corruption that will erase all training protocols and deployment plans while triggering a catastrophic failure in the geothermal power system. The implications were clear: not just data destruction, but physical facility destruction. Casualties? Emma asked. Davis's expression hardened. Minimal among support personnel. They've designed evacuation protocols that will trigger automatically with power system failures. The Dark Phantom operators, however, are housed in specialized training chambers designed to simulate extreme environments. Those chambers become death traps without power. Emma absorbed this without visible reaction. The ethical calculation was complex but clear. 12 Dark Phantom operators weighed against the thousands who would die if their assassination campaign succeeded. "Time to implementation?" she asked. Data extraction complete in 4 minutes. System corruption and power destabilization triggered simultaneously after secure transmission confirmation. Emma secured the room's entry points, establishing defensive positions that would allow them to hold if discovered before the operation completed. The facility remained unaware of their presence, all attention focused on the false security breach on the western perimeter. "This will change everything," Davis said quietly as the data transfer neared completion. "Once this intelligence reaches the right people, the entire contractor network collapses. Not just the Dark Phantom program, but all their operations." Emma understood the significance. This wasn't just about preventing an assassination campaign. It was about exposing corruption that had compromised military operations across multiple theaters. It was the culmination of what Phantom Scout had been created to accomplish: surgical removal of threats too deeply embedded for conventional forces to reach. The data transfer completed with a soft tone from the system. Davis implemented the final phase, complex code sequences that would cascade through the facility's operating systems, corrupting beyond recovery, while simultaneously destabilizing the geothermal power tap that provided energy. "Corruption process initiated," she confirmed. "We have 11 minutes before critical failures begin, 14 minutes to total system collapse." They moved with renewed urgency, retrieving their equipment and returning to the maintenance access tunnel. The facility remained unaware of the digital time bomb now counting down in its systems, all attention still focused on external security. As they navigated back through the electrical conduit, Emma felt the first vibrations, subtle tremors indicating the beginning of power system destabilization. The geothermal tap was already becoming unstable, pressure fluctuations creating microseismic events that would soon escalate to catastrophic failure. 8 minutes to evacuation protocols. Davis updated as they reached the drainage channel. 6 minutes after that to complete structural compromise. They increased their pace while maintaining stealth protocols, moving through the outer perimeter defenses with the same ghost-like efficiency that had allowed their entry. Behind them, alarm systems began activating as the facility's monitoring systems detected the first signs of critical failure. The mountain itself seemed to tremble as they reached the 5-kilometer mark, geothermal energy released in increasingly violent bursts as containment systems failed. Emergency evacuation procedures would be initiating now, all non-essential personnel moving to transport vehicles, all systems shifting to backup power that would soon fail as well. "We need to reach minimum safe distance," Davis warned as they pushed toward the outer security perimeter. "When the main geothermal tap fails, the pressure release will create a localized shock wave." They maintained their punishing pace, moving through terrain that would have stopped conventional operators without slowing. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the landscape that provided additional concealment as they extracted. At the 12-kilometer mark, they paused briefly on a ridge that provided visual confirmation of the facility. Even at this distance, they could see the emergency protocols in action: personnel carriers departing in coordinated evacuation patterns, emergency lighting activating as main power systems failed. 3 minutes to complete system failure, Davis noted, checking a specialized chronometer. We should take cover. They descended into a natural depression that offered protection from the impending shock wave, securing their equipment against displacement. The final minutes ticked away in tense silence, both operators mentally reviewing their extraction route and contingency plans. The mountain erupted with frightening violence. Not a conventional explosion, but a massive geothermal pressure release that sent rock and debris skyward in a spectacular display of natural force. The shock wave rolled across the landscape seconds later, passing overhead with a deep bass rumble that seemed to compress the very air around them. When it passed, they emerged to see a transformed landscape. Where the facility had been, a cloud of dust and steam now rose against the darkening sky. The mountain face had partially collapsed, burying the Dark Phantom operation beneath thousands of tons of rock. Facility destruction confirmed. Davis stated with clinical precision. Dark Phantom program terminated. Data successfully transmitted to secure intelligence assets. Emma studied the distant destruction, processing the significance of what they had accomplished. An entire assassination program eliminated before deployment, years of corrupt operations exposed. A major threat neutralized without conventional military engagement. What happens now? She asked as they prepared to move out. Davis secured her equipment with practiced efficiency. The intelligence we've extracted will trigger investigations across multiple agencies. The contractor network will collapse as evidence of their operations becomes public. Military command structures will undergo significant reorganization to eliminate compromised elements. And Phantom Scout? Emma pressed. We're still ghosts, as far as official records are concerned. Davis looked at her with an expression that combined determination with something like hope, an emotion rarely seen in operators trained to suppress all feeling. We remain ghosts, she confirmed. But now we're ghosts with purpose. The same skills that made us effective weapons can be used to expose corruption, prevent atrocities, protect those who can't protect themselves. There are more operations like Dark Phantom, more embedded threats that conventional forces can't touch. The implications crystallized in Emma's mind, not a return to official status, but something perhaps more meaningful. Two phantoms operating in the shadows, not as weapons deployed by potentially compromised command structures, but as independent agents, guided by the ethical core that had always defined true Phantom Scout operators. We continue the mission, Emma said, understanding flowing between them without need for elaborate explanation. Davis nodded once, the gesture conveying complete agreement. We continue the mission. They moved out as darkness settled fully across the mountains, two shadows flowing through the night with deadly purpose. Behind them, the evidence of their work rose in a column of dust against the star-filled sky. Ahead lay a world of embedded threats and hidden corruption that would never see them coming. The ghosts had found their true calling, not as weapons to be aimed by others, but as guardians operating beyond the reach of those who would use power for their own ends. The mountains watched in silence as they vanished into the darkness, two phantoms united by shared purpose and the unbreakable bond forged in the heart of impossible missions. 6 months after the destruction of the Dark Phantom facility, the world had changed in ways visible only to those who knew where to look. Investigations had quietly dismantled contractor networks across 3 continents. Military command structures had undergone significant reorganization as compromised officials were identified and removed. Regional tensions had eased as assassination plots failed to materialize. Yet few understood the true architects of this transformation, the phantoms who moved through shadows, leaving stability in their wake. Emma Hayes stood motionless on a rooftop in Cairo, the pre-dawn air carrying the scent of spices and diesel from the streets below. Her position overlooked a nondescript apartment building where, according to intelligence, the remnants of the contractor network were gathering to rebuild their operation. The desert wind tugged at her tactical clothing, but she remained perfectly still, a discipline honed through years of impossible missions. Target building shows 6 heat signatures on the 4th floor. Davis's voice came through her specialized communications device. 3 additional signatures on perimeter security. They're expecting trouble, but looking outward, not inward. Emma acknowledged with a single click. Their communications protocol minimized transmission time to avoid detection. In the 6 months since they had embraced their role as independent operatives, they had developed entirely new methodologies that built upon their Phantom Scout training, while incorporating innovations born from freedom from institutional constraints. Intelligence assets confirm Victor Crane is present, Davis continued. This is the first time the network's financial architect has surfaced since the Dark Phantom collapse. If we secure the documentation he's carrying, we complete the dismantling of the entire operation. Emma verified her approach vector one final time. The mission parameters were precise: infiltrate the meeting, secure digital evidence of financial connections to government officials, then extract without detection. No casualties unless absolutely necessary. This wasn't assassination or destruction, it was surgical intelligence gathering that would allow legitimate authorities to finish what they had started. Proceeding to insertion point, Emma transmitted, then moved from her observation position with silent efficiency. The 6 months of operations had transformed both former Phantom Scout operators. Where once they had been weapons deployed by potentially compromised command structures, now they were something more refined. Independent agents guided by ethical purpose rather than orders. Each mission they undertook was selected based on rigorous criteria: potential civilian casualties if they didn't intervene, corruption too deeply embedded for conventional forces to address, threats that existed in the shadows between official jurisdictions. Emma descended to street level, moving through early morning shadows with perfect environmental integration. Cairo was awakening around her, vendors preparing stalls, workers heading to early shifts, the eternal rhythm of urban life providing both concealment and challenges. She navigated through this living maze without disturbing its patterns, a ghost passing through reality without altering its flow. 3 blocks from the target building, she encountered the first security element, a disguised observer positioned to identify approaching threats. The man was professional, his attention patterns revealing military training, but he was looking for conventional approaches. Emma flowed around his observation cone like water around stone, using micro-terrain and urban features to remain perpetually in his blind spots. First security element bypassed, she sub-vocalized into her communications device. Proceeding to service entrance. Davis's acknowledgement came as a single click. They had been operating in such perfect synchronization that extended communication had become unnecessary. Davis would be approaching from the opposite direction, creating a pincer movement that would allow them to secure all potential exit routes once inside. The service entrance was secured with both electronic and physical measures: a keypad, security camera, and reinforced door designed to prevent unauthorized access. Emma produced a specialized device that interfaced with the keypad's electronics, bypassing security protocols by simulating authorized credentials. The camera received a different treatment: a precisely aimed microtransmitter that looped existing footage rather than disabling the system outright. The difference was crucial. Disabled security triggered immediate response. Manipulated security created false confidence. Entering target building, Emma transmitted as the door clicked open. Service corridor clear. She moved through maintenance areas with practiced caution, using structural blueprints memorized during mission preparation. The building's internal security was sophisticated but designed primarily to prevent intrusion from external threats. Someone already inside, moving with purpose and apparent authorization, triggered fewer automated responses. The 4th floor housed 6 apartments, one of which had been converted into the network's temporary operations center. Emma detected subtle security enhancements as she approached: pressure sensors in the flooring, infrared beams across hallway junctions, signal jammers to prevent unauthorized communications. All were measures she and Davis had encountered before and developed counters for. In position at emergency stairwell, Davis transmitted: 4th floor security identified and mapped. Primary meeting room confirmed as apartment 4C. 6 participants, including primary target. Emma acknowledged and synchronized her chronometer. The infiltration would proceed on precisely coordinated timing. Davis would create a distraction in the building's electrical system, while Emma accessed the apartment through a maintenance shaft that connected to the ventilation system. At the designated moment, the corridor lights flickered briefly. Not enough to trigger emergency protocols, but sufficient to draw security attention to potential electrical issues. Emma used this momentary distraction to access the maintenance panel and slip into the narrow shaft that ran between walls. The space was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for her shoulders, but she navigated it with the fluid precision that characterized all her movements. The shaft connected to the ventilation system above apartment 4C, giving her perfect audio access to the meeting below. Through the grate, She could see 6 men gathered around a table, covered with documents and digital devices. Victor Crane, a silver-haired man with cold eyes and impeccable clothing, was addressing the group in hushed tones. The setback was significant, but not terminal. His voice carried clearly to Emma's position. We've secured new financing through channels that remain uncompromised. The digital documentation I've brought contains all necessary connections to re-establish our operational capacity within 3 months. Emma identified the target immediately, a specialized data device on the table before Crane. It would contain all financial connections, all compromised officials still in position, all planned operations for the network's resurrection. Exactly what they had come for. She waited, gathering intelligence through perfect stillness, as the meeting continued. The men discussed reconstruction plans, security protocols, potential threats. None suspected that their greatest threat was already among them, listening to every word, memorizing faces and names for future reference. Primary target confirmed. Emma transmitted when the meeting paused for refreshments. Data device on central table, security patterns established. Ready for acquisition phase. Davis's acknowledgement came with additional information. Building security responding to electrical disturbance on lower levels. Estimated window for extraction, 4 minutes after acquisition. Emma prepared for the final phase, producing a specialized device designed for one purpose, creating momentary disorientation without permanent harm. When activated, it would generate a sensory overload that would affect everyone in the room for approximately 30 seconds. Sufficient time for her to secure the target and exit without requiring lethal force. The device deployed with perfect timing, a flash of calibrated light and sound that disrupted cognitive processes without causing physical damage. Through specialized filters in her tactical gear, Emma remained unaffected as she dropped into the room and moved directly to the data device. The 6 men reacted with confusion, their trained responses hampered by sensory disorientation. 2 security personnel reached for weapons but found themselves unable to coordinate the necessary movements. Crane himself stumbled backward, hands covering his eyes against stimuli his brain couldn't process correctly. Emma secured the device in 12 seconds, confirming its authenticity through pre-established verification protocols. The entire room remained in controlled chaos, none of the occupants able to track her movements or even confirm her presence beyond a shadow moving through their compromised perception. Target secured. She transmitted, extracting via planned route. She exited through the apartment door, moving into the corridor with the same deliberate efficiency that had characterized her entrance. The building security remained focused on lower-level electrical disturbances, leaving her extraction path temporarily clear. Davis would be moving to the predetermined rendezvous point, having ensured that external security remained focused away from Emma's exit vector. 4 minutes after acquisition, exactly as planned, Emma emerged from the service entrance into early morning Cairo. The streets had grown more active during her time inside, providing additional crowd coverage as she implemented her disappearance protocol, a series of predetermined movements and costume adjustments that transformed her from tactical operative to unremarkable civilian in less than 2 minutes. The rendezvous point was a small cafe 3 blocks from the target building. Emma entered casually, ordered tea in fluent Arabic, and took a seat near the back where Davis already waited, appearing to all observers as nothing more extraordinary than a tourist consulting a guidebook. Acquisition confirmed, Davis asked without looking up as Emma sat down. Complete success, Emma replied, securing the data device in a specialized container that blocked all electronic signatures. The device contains everything: financial connections, remaining network assets, planned resurrection timeline. Davis nodded slightly, approval visible only to someone who knew her as well as Emma did. Our intelligence contact will meet us at the secondary location in 40 minutes. This should provide everything needed to finish dismantling the network permanently. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 phantoms temporarily visible in the morning light, their mission nearly complete. Around them, Cairo continued its eternal rhythms, unaware that the course of regional stability had just been secured by ghosts moving through its streets. The contrast wasn't lost on Emma. The mundane and the extraordinary existing simultaneously, separated only by perception. 6 months, she said quietly, watching the city awaken around them. 6 months since we decided to continue the mission independently. Do you ever question the path we've chosen? Davis considered the question with the same thoughtful precision she applied to tactical challenges. I question the method sometimes, but never the purpose. What we're doing matters, Emma. Not because someone orders it, but because we choose it based on clear ethical principles. The observation resonated with Emma's own evolution. Phantom Scout had created them as weapons, perfectly honed instruments designed to execute missions without question. Now they had become something more profound, independent moral agents using their extraordinary capabilities to protect, rather than simply destroy. The difference is choice, Emma replied, understanding flowing between them. Everything we do now stems from decisions we make independently, guided by principles rather than orders. Davis nodded. That's what the original Phantom Scout program never fully understood. The most effective operatives aren't those who follow orders blindly, but those who understand the deeper purpose behind their actions. Moral autonomy creates better results than mechanical obedience. Their contact arrived precisely on schedule. A nondescript man who could have been a professor or businessman, unremarkable except to those who knew what to look for. The data transfer took less than 2 minutes, conducted under the appearance of casual conversation about tourist destinations. When completed, the man departed with the means to finish what Emma and Davis had started months ago at the Dark Phantom facility. Transmission complete, Davis confirmed after running verification protocols on her specialized equipment. Intelligence assets now have everything needed to identify and remove remaining network elements. Emma felt the familiar satisfaction of mission completion, not the hollow victory of following orders, but the deeper fulfillment that came from purposeful action aligned with genuine ethical commitment. Where next? She asked as they prepared to depart the cafe separately, already implementing their disappearance protocols. Davis produced a small digital device containing their secure mission files. 3 potential operations that meet our intervention criteria. Human trafficking network operating across Eastern European borders. Biological weapons research facility disguised as pharmaceutical development. Assassination program targeting reform-minded judges in South America. Emma absorbed the information, already calculating approaches and resource requirements. All 3 represent significant threats operating in jurisdictional shadows where conventional forces are constrained. All 3 would result in substantial civilian casualties if allowed to proceed, Davis added, the ethical calculation explicit in their decision-making process. The weight of the choice settled between them, not burden, but purpose, where once they had been told what to target and why, now they evaluated, decided, and acted based on their own moral compass. It was a freedom that carried profound responsibility, one they had embraced fully since emerging from the shadows of their former existence. We take all 3, Emma decided. Sequential operations, beginning with the most time-sensitive threat. Davis nodded agreement, already calculating logistics. The trafficking network has an operational window in 72 hours. We can be in position in 48. They finalized details with the efficient precision that characterized all their interactions, then prepared to separate until their next rendezvous point. Before departing, Davis paused, studying Emma with an expression rarely seen in their former lives. Not the cold assessment of operational readiness, but genuine human connection. What we're doing matters, Emma, she said quietly. Not just the missions, but how we approach them. We're proving that even those created as weapons can choose to become something more. Emma understood the significance of this evolution. Phantom Scout had designed them to be ghosts, insubstantial, disposable, defined only by their function. Instead, they had become something paradoxically more solid by embracing the shadows completely, autonomous agents guided by principles stronger than any command structure. We were trained to haunt battlefields, Emma replied. Now we haunt those who create battlefields unnecessarily. They parted ways outside the cafe, disappearing into Cairo's morning crowds with practiced ease. To all observers, they were simply travelers passing through, unremarkable, forgettable, gone from memory moments after being seen. Their true impact remained invisible, except in the absence of atrocities that never occurred, conflicts that never escalated, innocent lives that continued uninterrupted. 3 weeks later, Emma stood motionless in the forest outside Prague, waiting for Davis to reach the rendezvous point after completing her portion of their operation against the human trafficking network. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant rain, the forest around her alive with natural sounds that masked human movement. The trafficking network had been sophisticated and far-reaching, protected by corrupted officials across multiple countries. Conventional law enforcement had been stymied by jurisdictional limitations and political interference. The network's leadership had operated with impunity, certain that their connections and compartmentalized structure made them untouchable. They had never considered the possibility of phantoms who operated beyond jurisdictional constraints, who could infiltrate secured locations without detection, who could gather evidence impossible for conventional authorities to obtain. Over 2 weeks of coordinated operations, Emma and Davis had systematically extracted documentation, financial records, and victim testimony that provided irrefutable evidence of crimes too significant to be buried by political interference. The final phase had been completed hours earlier, the secured transmission of all evidence to legitimate authorities across 5 countries simultaneously, coordinated with trustworthy journalists who would ensure the information couldn't be suppressed. The network was exposed beyond recovery, its operations disrupted, its leadership facing prosecution based on evidence that appeared to materialize from nowhere. Emma detected Davis's approach before seeing her, the subtlest change in forest rhythms, the microscopic pressure differences that indicated controlled movement through dense vegetation. Seconds later, Davis materialized from the darkness, moving with the same fluid efficiency that made her nearly invisible even to those trained to detect infiltration. Transmission confirmed across all channels. Davis reported as they conducted equipment checks for their extraction. Authorities in 3 countries have already initiated arrests. The network is finished. Emma secured her specialized gear with practiced precision. Casualties? None, Davis confirmed. Complete operational success without direct engagement. The evidence speaks for itself. The satisfaction between them was palpable, not from violence or destruction, but from justice implemented through skill rather than force. They had become something beyond their training, something perhaps more aligned with what Phantom Scout should have been from the beginning. Not instruments of death, but agents of accountability for those who believed themselves beyond reach. The biological weapons facility is next, Emma noted as they prepared to move out. Intelligence indicates accelerated development timelines. Davis nodded, already calculating approach vectors and resource requirements. We'll need specialized equipment for containment and documentation. The facility's security will be substantially more sophisticated than what we encountered here. The challenge energized rather than daunted them. Each mission built upon the last, their capabilities evolving through experience, and the freedom to innovate beyond institutional constraints. Where Phantom Scout had created them to be interchangeable assets, independence had transformed them into something unique. Operators whose effectiveness stemmed not from mechanical obedience, but from moral purpose aligned with extraordinary skill. As they moved through the darkened forest toward their extraction point, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From weapons deployed by others to autonomous agents guided by principle. From ghosts haunting battlefields to spirits protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, the transformation wasn't complete. Perhaps never would be, but the direction was clear and the purpose undeniable. We've come a long way from that valley in Afghanistan, she observed as they reached the forest edge, where transportation awaited. Davis paused, looking back at the darkness from which they had emerged. We haven't just survived, Emma, we've evolved. Become something beyond what they intended when they created Phantom Scout. Something better, Emma added, certainty in her voice. Something necessary, Davis agreed. The shadows between jurisdictions, between what's officially acknowledged and what actually happens. That's where the greatest threats often hide. That's where we operate best. They moved to the waiting vehicle, 2 phantoms temporarily visible under moonlight, before disappearing once more into their chosen element. Behind them, evidence materialized in police stations across Europe. Victims found voices that would be heard, and those who had believed themselves untouchable discovered the terrifying reality that some shadows contained purpose beyond their understanding. The mission continued, not because it was ordered, but because it was chosen. Not because it served institutional interests, but because it protected those who deserved protection. Emma Hayes and Alexis Davis had been created as weapons, but had transformed themselves into something far more profound. Moral agents whose extraordinary capabilities served principles stronger than any command structure. They remained ghosts to the world, their existence acknowledged only in whispered legends among those who operated in shadows. Their impact manifested in absence rather than presence. Atrocities that never occurred, conflicts that never escalated, innocent lives that continued uninterrupted because phantoms had chosen to stand between them and those who would do harm. The war continued, invisible to most, essential to all. And in that shadow conflict, two spirits moved with deadly purpose, not haunting the innocent, but becoming the very thing that haunted those who preyed upon them. Not weapons to be aimed by others, but shields guided by conscience. Not ghosts defined by death, but guardians defined by life preserved. Their story would never be told in full, their names never celebrated openly, their achievements never acknowledged officially. But in the shadows between what was documented and what was real, their legend grew, spectral defenders who appeared when needed most, who accomplished the impossible without being seen, who vanished back into darkness leaving justice in their wake. And perhaps that was the greatest evolution of all, from those who killed on command to those who protected by choice. From instruments of policy to embodiments of principle. From phantoms who haunted battlefields to spirits who haunted the unjust. The story of Emma Hayes and Alexis Davis would remain mostly untold, but its impact would echo through lives saved, communities preserved, and justice served where conventional forces could not reach. They had found their true calling in the darkness, not as weapons, but as guardians. Not as ghosts, but as spirits with purpose beyond the comprehension of those who had created them. They continued their mission, not because they were ordered to, but because they had chosen to. And in that choice lay all the difference between what they had been and what they had become. The transformation from instruments to individuals, from assets to autonomous moral agents whose extraordinary capabilities serve the most fundamental human principle: protection of the innocent from those who believe themselves beyond accountability. Two phantoms, one purpose, endless shadows to navigate. The mission continued because they willed it so, and because the world needed guardians who could move through darkness without becoming part of it. Emma Hayes and Alexis Davis had been designed as ghosts, but had become something far more powerful, spirits whose purpose transcended the limitations of those who had created them. And in that transformation lay a truth more profound than any mission briefing could capture. The most effective protectors were not those who followed orders without question, but those who chose their purpose with absolute clarity and pursued it without compromise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.